Good evening. My name is Joe Fleming. I am a Northeastern alum and the chairman of the Health Science Entrepreneurs and a founder of the program. We've been around about 7 years now, and we are alumni volunteers who got together to give back to Northeastern. Tonight is an example of that program. We run student events, we run alumni events, and we have a mentoring program. And just for those to give a brief commercial, for those of you who may have an idea to start a company, we have a program to help you out. So I'd like to extend the invitation. If you do have a desire and a clear vision of what you would like to do and want to explore it, we have mentors to help you. Please contact us through Julie Norton, any of us here this evening, and we'd love to help you. We have a number of companies, some of which are represented here tonight. Hello, Eugene. And Eugene now has customers 2 years after, and he's doing a great job. So welcome. We care about what we do here. We have some wonderful folks for you to meet. I'd like to introduce Chris Ford. Chris Ford is my partner in crime. Chris Ford is never left his co-op job. His co-op job turned into his career, turned into his business, and he founded the third largest kidney dialysis chain of centers in the country, and is very successful and has given 100% to this program and does a wonderful job. And Chris, I'd like to hand the microphone to you, and I'm off the clock.
Thank you. Okay. My name is Chris Ford. I'm your moderator for tonight's program. Nice to see a lot of people here. Julie, who I want to give a lot of credit to. Julie, wave your hand there. If you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, you need a Julie all the way through everything with you, believe me. But she keeps the trains running on time, and she was fretting over how many people are going to come because the room holds 125 people. So she was all worried about that. I think when I saw her taking a couple of chairs out of the closet, I know she had made it, so we're all set there. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Health Sciences Entrepreneur event. We have a fall event and a spring event. This is the fall event. I am a graduate of the business school, not of Bouvet. That's a different story for a different time, but here I am, and I work with Joe on the program. We have a terrific program at the Bouvet College of Life Sciences. The program, as Joe mentioned, we're here to help students, faculty, and alumni become better entrepreneurs and hopefully someday realize your dream to take something forward. I also participate in the mentoring program. It's a very rewarding experience, and you know, on some of the teams I mentor people just like everyone in this room, people that had a good idea, wanted to commercialize it or bring it to life. So it can happen for you too. I want to thank everybody at the university, particularly Tracy Dodenhoff, who's not here, but she runs CRI, and she's organized the Global Entrepreneurship Week, and I think there's some great programs on this week. Today's event is entitled Health Science Career Opportunities Through the Lens of an Entrepreneur. And you'll hear the view from 3 different fields, nursing, drug development, and informatics. And they'll give you their vision on how they see the opportunities in the future. I want to start off first just to kind of frame a little bit of the conversation, but an article that I read recently was about a guy by the name of David Lawrence, who was a former CEO of Kaiser Permanente. And if you don't know what Kaiser is, but they're a big health exchange for employees in the West Coast, and they're very well known for their programs. And he was actually trying to point out at a recent RAND Corporation conference 6 areas where he felt that entrepreneurs, can look for the next big opportunities in healthcare. And these are the 6 up here now, and I mean, some of it is, we can talk a bit about it, but if you follow how this works, there is a trend of a change in the healthcare system right now where these features will come in. Now, triage, of course, is just taking care of people when they come into the system, directing them to the determine whether they need care, and reducing unnecessary medical care. Navigation is once that they get into the system, that they're directed in the right area, get the appropriate care. The word he used in the article was he didn't want them floating around the system, and I'm sure we've all floated around the system one time in our life, but to make sure that they value the time and cost of physicians and hospitals. So that's another key area going forward. Chronic illness, developing tools to help facilitate people with chronic illnesses, take the burden off of the patients. Preventive care, and that's creating low-end safety devices and high-end screening products for people that, before they get care, to avoid them being into the system. Wellness management speaks for itself. Personally, I think you'll see a lot of that happen in the corporate side. And then end-of-life care, and I think, as you know, if you look at the numbers, end-of-life is a very expensive part of a person's time on Earth, and upwards of 75% of your healthcare dollars are spent in the last 18 months of your life. So those are the 6 areas that Dr. Lawrence brought up as the next area of big opportunities. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the people. Well, let me go back just for a second on one other thing. Let's talk about where we are right now. As you know, we just had a presidential election last week, and we had healthcare reform survive 2 near-death experiences. One was the Supreme Court decision in June, and the second one was the presidential election. And I'm here to tell you, if you haven't heard it already, but the Obama system will go forward, and it's here to stay. The individual mandates, the healthcare exchanges, the Medicaid expansion, 30 million people will be added to healthcare coverage in the United States. And there will be major reimbursement cuts made to Medicare and Medicaid. And that's the next thing you're going to see. This thing about the fiscal cliff is somewhat related to that, but Medicare and Medicaid are going to be hit pretty hard. So life will change as we know it, but therein lies the opportunity. Change is really good for those of us that are interested in this part of the American life. And tonight, to provide some insight how an entrepreneur looks at that change, we have 3 distinguished panel of experts to talk with you. And they come from 3 different areas. As I mentioned, nursing, drug development, and informatics. And let me begin and introduce the panel to us and ask them to come up and take their seats. The first one is Christina Chima, who has been in drug development roles in biopharmaceutical, venture capital, and academic settings. She served as the Vice President of Drug Development for Verdante Pharmaceuticals, previously a principal at Claris Ventures, played some key roles with transitional research at Wyeth, is that the right way they say it? And before joining the biopharmaceutical industry, she was a clinical pharmacist at Dana-Farber. She currently serves on the board of directors of Columbia Laboratories, the Neuromuscular Disease Advisory Committee for Therapeutics, the MDA Muscular Dystrophy Association, and is a fellow member of the Health Sciences Entrepreneur Program. We've actually sat on some of the same mentoring teams together, and she's really a terrific mentor. She received her Bachelor of Science and Doctor of Pharmacy at Mass College of Pharmacy and a Master's of Health Professions from Northeastern University. So, Christina, would you perhaps take your seat, please? Our next panelist is Dan Feinberg. He's the Director of Health Informatics Graduate Program here at Northeastern. Prior to coming to Northeastern, he was President of the New England Chapter of Health Information Management Systems, and he's a serial entrepreneur. He's built multiple companies in publishing, healthcare, telemedicine, and a company that remotely monitored diabetic eye disease. Dan's another fellow member, a mentor, a great guy. Everything that you touch, see, and hear is going to involve informatics going forward. So He's another great panel member. And Dan, would you please take your seat? He also has an MBA from BU. I didn't want to go away without saying that, being a Northeastern guy. I wanted to throw the BU thing in there for him. And the final panelist is the Dean of Bouvet College, Dean Terry Fulmer. She's a professor and dean. She has a bachelor's degree from Skidmore, a master's and a doctoral degree from Boston College, a little school up the other end of Commonwealth Ave. You've probably heard of those guys. She's a geriatric nurse practitioner. Has a postmaster's certificate from NYU. She's an elected member of the Institute of Medicine, which is pretty good stuff. She's nationally recognized as a leading expert in geriatrics and her research on the topic of elder abuse and neglect. Prior to joining Northeastern, she was the professor of nursing and founding dean of the New York University College of Nursing. She's a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing, the Gerontology Society of America, and the New York Academy of Medicine. And I'd like to invite her up to the panel right there. Dean Fulmer. One thing about the dean, she's been on board about a year. We used to call her the new dean. But she's informed us, now that there's a new dean in the School of Law, there's a new dean in the College of Business Administration, and a fellow woman dean in the College of Engineering. She's not the new dean anymore, she told us. So heretofore, she's going to be known as the old new dean, is what she is. So let me go through the format for tonight's event. We encourage audience participation in these events. What's going to happen is I will start off asking the panel some questions to get the conversation going, and then I'll open it up to the audience. And we really encourage you to ask questions of our panelists. And just please make sure when you do ask the question that you've been recognized, and if you need a microphone, you have one. And our goal is to try to keep this conversation at a high level, talking more about trends and emerging markets within the healthcare structure. So please don't personalize your question too much. If you'd like to talk to one of the panelists, we will have an opportunity after the session out front. I'm going to start off and ask our panelists each to answer this question in their own words. And here's the question. Can you please make an opening statement regarding the trend for entrepreneurial opportunities in your area of expertise? And I'm going to ask Christina Chimmer to go first. She's in the drug development area.
So first of all, this is a great sized group. So as Chris said, make sure that you steer us in the direction that's of interest to you. So this is a great opportunity for us because it's a small enough group that we can actually see you and see if our comments resonate with you guys. And it's also an opportunity for you because we are in this very intimate format. So to address Chris's questions, Chris's first question. So in terms of what opportunities are being opened up by the current sort of trends in healthcare, I'll address it in two ways. One is how we do things, and then what we do. In terms of how we do things in drug development, I would probably highlight the tremendous changes in the biopharmaceutical industry over the last few years. Tremendous amount of contraction and downsizing and buyouts and very large transactions between companies merging. And that has actually affected the workforce very significantly with a lot of the downsizing. One very positive, as Chris pointed out, every change has a silver lining. One very positive output of that has been the increased reliance, again, on academia for early research and development and on small biotech companies. And now a lot of the early research that has been traditionally done very much in the industry setting is now shifting to back into academia. So what you're seeing is a lot more fluid dialogue and really shift of people career-wise between academia to industry. And the reverse shift, which we haven't seen in quite a while, if ever, is going back from industry into academia. So it's really an unprecedented time for that. The other thing, which has to do with the what, is to put it in perspective, let's look at our population and our aging and our demographics. We have people living longer. We have an increased, very much larger aging population. So as a result of that, there is going to be a particular emphasis and value placed on dealing with chronic disease and dealing for chronic disease with a lot longer than we have in the past because people are living so much longer. So when you think of entrepreneurial opportunities, you can think of a lot of things that have to do with how we make that happen, also at a time when all of us have much higher expectations of quality of life as we're living longer and like to stay more active. So in terms of how healthcare is delivered, in terms of how we do research, we're looking at chronic diseases, we're looking at rare diseases, we're looking at a number of things that haven't been as much of an emphasis before. And last but not least, I would point out that you have to be prepared to reinvent yourself several times in a career. And the days of staying in the same job for your lifetime are over. And even if you do physically, your job will look very different every 5 years, I would say, because there's such unprecedented changes in science that are happening at such a rapid pace that you become obsolete. So I think that, and I'm feeling it myself, more than ever, we're being challenged with having to learn and really excel in new areas that are often beyond our basic comfort level.
Thank you, Christina. Dan, do you want to repeat the question, or you?
I'll give it a shot. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
There are three things I would say we should be looking at. One is we're changing the way healthcare is paid for, but not just what we're paying, how we pay, but what we pay for. So we have gone from process measures for paying for what you do to paying for outcome measures to see how well the patient does. And that completely changes the way you can approach care, because instead of trying to do the procedural things that you have been commanded to do, you are now attempting to get this patient to a healthy state the best way you can. And that means possibly buying something from an entrepreneur who says, I have a different way to do it. I have a computer that will call all your diabetic patients and say, hey, how are you doing today? I'll call all your depressed patients, and we have a system that will listen to their tone of voice and will detect the people who are depressed and need to have a live person call them and say, hey, how are you really doing? Let's help you out here. There are a lot of things that are happening there, and that completely changes the opportunities, because you can bring in new ways of doing things because they're not getting paid for how they do them, they're getting paid for what works. The second thing we're seeing is, particularly within health informatics, is interoperability has been commanded by the federal government. You will install a system that can interchange data with other systems. They will be interoperable. The reality may or may not match the theory quite as much as we'd hoped, but there is still opportunities there to say, I'm going to come in with my device that will connect in and get all of this data and show it to you your way. We're not going to have to own everything from the moment the patient walks in to when every procedure that happens to when the patient walks out of the hospital to be able to show you the data. If interoperability works as we hoped, the theory is that you could make a device that will then connect to the lab system to get the labs, will connect to the radiology system to get the rads, and will not have to do everything for everybody. And that also opens things up a lot for entrepreneurs. The third area is that these systems are gathering a lot of data. And that data is how we are going to calculate the outcomes that we're paying for, but it also opens opportunities just in the sense of analyzing the data itself, because data analytics is very hot, but also other things you could do with that data is to be able to find other interesting things to say, we're going to be able to figure out who's getting sick before they end up in the hospital. And that changes not just financially for the payers who are then going to buy your product, but we are making people healthier and happier. And this is a great business. It's a great business to say, hey, we made money selling 500 widgets, but we sold things that are going to make people healthy. It's going to keep them from ending up in the hospital. And anyone who's been in the hospital or visited someone in the hospital knows it's not a lot of fun. Being sick is not what people want to be. And if we can find the people who are headed towards a crisis and intervene before they get into a crisis, that saves money and it makes people healthier. and looking at the data and being able to pick those people out and being able then also, maybe you have a product that will do something about that. To say, all right, fine, you already know who your sick patients are, but we're going to help you keep them healthier. Those are the three areas that I see the future potential coming in.
So let me see who I'm talking to tonight. How many of you are nurses? Raise your hand. How many of you are pharmacists, physical therapists, other occupational counseling? How many of you are in public health? Probably many of you are. There you go. And how about speech pathology, language audiology? How about people outside of Bouvet who are joining us tonight? Welcome. We're really happy that you're here. And if I left out any groups, you want to call them out?
Student nursing?
Analytics.
Analytics, that's important. Thank you. Who else I missed?
Student nurses?
Student nurses, that's important. And thank you all for being here this evening. And so I heard a really important comment recently, and it goes like this. People don't want health care. They want health. So that's the first thing we need to be thinking about as we move into this new era of the Affordable Care Act, accountable care organizations, and 32 million additional covered lives. People want health, and they want to be in control of their health. They need, we looked at Chris's first slide. If you want to put that back up there, I think it's a very good, important backdrop for us. And tonight, I want to comment from the perspective as a nurse and a nurse leader and say that as you look at those words, those are our roles. That's what nurses do. We triage, navigate, we lead people through chronic illness episodes. Certainly our role is in prevention, wellness, and end-of-life care. And so this is the biggest opportunity we're going to have. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation report on the future of nursing says nurses need the highest level of education possible, that we need to be at the table, that we need more doctor-prepared nurses for our future workforce, and that we need to be tech-savvy. So I would say, now just clicking that notch a little bit, that probably all people in the healthcare arena, all of us as clinicians, all of us as practitioners need those same things. And the fundamental shift around the Accountable Care Act is that we're going to be working in teams. Now, we always talk about teams, but yesterday I was at a meeting at Mass General in a retreat for 4 hours talking about what's the appropriate education for teams for the future. What's the right dose of team? Who should be in the team? What can we expect by virtue of the fact that we came together in a team? These are the fundamental questions we're going to be asked to provide answers for, and I think that all of us have an incredible stake in that.
All right, very good, thank you. Let me follow up on Dean Fulmer's comment about people wanting health, not so much health care, but, and I'll direct this question to Christina. It has to do with personalized medicine, which is the use of detailed information about a patient's genotype or gene expression, along with the patient's clinical data, in order to select a medication, therapy, or preventative measure particularly suited to that patient. And I know she has an interest in rare diseases and things of that nature too, but could you talk to personalized medicine and perhaps where that's going to go?
So personalized medicine we hear a lot about is basically being able to match the right drug to the right patient. And in the past, we've thought about these large diseases as one disease, like diabetes, like rheumatoid arthritis, like MS. But in reality, now science and the decoding of the human genome, genomics have taught us that actually a lot of these large diseases can be dissected in much smaller subgroups that are actually characterized by very different pathological pathways, different drug targets that you can use to address them, and so forth. So, so basically, large diseases are becoming a bunch of small diseases. And in the past, a lot of the care, a lot of the therapeutic approach was based on a trial and error approach. Essentially, you try a drug, you put the patient on the drug for X number of months, maybe it works. And maybe in 60% of the works, it works spectacularly well. Ambrel is one example, but in the other 40%, it really doesn't. In the meantime, the drug may cost a lot of money, may have a lot of side effects, all the stuff you have to pay for, and like Dan said, in the end, the healthcare system has to pay for everything. So if you had a refrigerator, if this was the field of engineering, and the refrigerator only worked 60% of the time, so you would consider it totally suboptimal. So now with science being where it is, actually the FDA is starting to think that as well, and they expect us with these new tools we have, which is again where informatics is absolutely critical because we're dealing with volumes of data that we've never encountered before. We do have the tools to be able to pre-select the patients, and we've seen the emergence of that in the oncology area, but that's going to move more and more bit by bit in the mainstream. Ideally, that should actually decrease the cost of healthcare and obviously lead to much better outcomes much sooner. So that's what personalized medicine is. In terms of opportunities, you're asking about the opportunities. Well, one that comes to mind immediately is diagnostics. And I think that there is, we've just sort of scratched the surface in terms of diagnostic approaches to identify these subsets, to identify the disease and the specific phenotype very accurately from the beginning. And to the extent that we can have non-invasive diagnostics, like such as imaging, such as a lot of the efforts that actually we see in the entrepreneurial efforts here at Northeastern, that are very much in line to where the future is here. So I think that the ability to diagnose very precisely with sophisticated tools is a huge area. Another area is really in how we run clinical trials. These are trials run in much smaller populations. We look desperately for what we call biomarkers of response. In many diseases that it takes a long time to get to the clinical response to see if the drug works or not. You would like to have something that's what we call a little bit more upstream, something that tells you that we're hitting the right target, that we're on the right track, so that we don't have to wait for, let's say, 6 or 12 months to see the clinical response, but we know that there is, with high-level assurance, there is a very strong correlation between that biomarker and the subsequent clinical response, and perhaps run smaller programs and be able to have drugs developed and approved faster. Because right now the cost and length of drug development is incredibly long and really unsustainable, which is why we're seeing all this really shrinkage in the industry. So here, the development of biomarkers, I would say, is absolutely huge in personalized medicine. And the other trend that I meant to mention in my introductory comments that fits here as well is a lot of the work in this space is now being done in biotech in a highly outsourced model. So more than ever, facilities and contract research organizations that can support all the work that was being done in-house externally will grow immensely. A lot of what we call the CROs for both in vitro work, for preclinical animal work, and certainly for conduct of clinical trials. A lot of the R&D has been externalized, so a lot of the organizations that can support that well, including the data management and informatics, will be very well positioned.
Excellent. You know, the world has really changed for big pharma. A lot of it's going to be driven by reimbursement changes also. I'll just say I did international work for 15 years, and when developing countries or emerging societies start to gain some wealth, there's two things that I've observed that happen. They get a car, that's the first thing, traffic gets crazy, but they pay for health care. They will pay for their health care, whether the system pays it or they'll pay out of their own pocket. So there's a lot of room there. Let me turn to Dan, and Dan, I want to talk a little bit about the healthcare information technology that's in place right now, up to this point anyway. My experience being in the healthcare industry for 40 plus years is no one's ever had a good medical information system. I don't care who you talk to, they put up with it. It doesn't, you know, I mean, I think it just looks uneconomical. They seem to throw money at it. That's been the history. I get a sense that's going to change with the healthcare reform, the reimbursement changing, you know, and as Christina pointed out, you know, having data available to make better decisions, quicker decisions, or whatever. So how do you see that changing? Because I think all other the technology businesses seem to have a little bit of rigor to what they do, but in healthcare, I just haven't seen it. So how do you think that's going to change?
Well, I have two parts to that answer. One is more spend. You know, things cost more, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting less value from it. I mean, everybody in here has an iPhone or an Android phone, and 15 years ago, we spent almost nothing on smartphones. And that increased spending we don't consider a bad thing. There's a new technology available. How efficient are we being about that spending? I think early on, people bought Meditech because everybody bought Meditech. And it was painful to use, and it was just really, really awful interface, but it was what you had. But things have been changing. People have been going towards systems that really do things. Meaningful use, the standards you have to meet to get the money from the federal government has been moving on. We've gone through our second phase, and we're heading almost to, very soon, to the third phase, saying this isn't enough. You have to go here. You have to go here. And so this is ratcheting up what people have to do to be able to meet those criteria. And you're seeing people change. Here in Boston, people must know Partners Healthcare has switched to Epic from the system they developed in-house, spending a huge amount of money on that. And that same story is happening all over Boston and all over the country, where people are saying, well, we started out with an EMR and then we had to get a better one that really does the things that really should have been doing all along. Are they great and perfect? No, but I think we are seeing we've left behind the days of we'll buy whatever you've got because heck, it's good enough and that's all we can get and we're sort of happy with it because, that's all we know. I think you're seeing a lot of change there. And there's a lot of opportunity as the third phase comes into meaningful use. People are going to have to do more things. They have to have their prescriptions in phase 2 have to go from a system being written in the hospital to the pharmacy, and then a message has to come back saying how much it was refilled. So the clinician can say, hey, I see you haven't refilled your antidepressants in 4 months. Can we talk? And these kinds of systems are taking them beyond where they started and into more advanced systems and more integrated systems, step by step by step. Are they as competitive as other businesses? Probably not. And there's the big point, people might be familiar with an article, IT does not matter. IT doesn't matter, was the title. And he argued that there was a time when you said, well, we have special computers and so we're doing better than every other company. What's our competitive advantage? We have our special computer system. And that we've gotten to the point where everybody says, well, we all have Microsoft Word. We all have email. Nobody's going to say, well, what does our company do well? Well, we have email. And we have Microsoft Word. That's how we're going to beat our competitors. And it's, just like electricity, it's just like having chairs. It's just something you do. It's no longer a distinction. Will we get there with health informatics? Yes. Are we there yet? No, but we're getting closer.
And there's a lot of money. You gave me a number in the billions. What was it that's going into? I mean, they keep touting how much money is going that way.
Federal government put, depending on which pot you're looking at, a pot of $80 billion, 80, and then another $8 billion and another $30 billion. So, I mean, we're looking at over $100 billion has been poured into this. There's a lot of money.
Pretty wide open field. One other thing, just on this list that Dr. Lawrence put forth, it was based on 2 major premises why he thought these were big opportunities. One was the inefficient systems that we have in place, and we've all seen that. And the other one is uninformed consumers. And I think you'll be making more decisions on your own health care as you go forward. Let me turn to Dean Fulmer and just ask you to follow up my comment about end-of-life care. I unfortunately saw both my parents and my wife's parents go through end-of-life, and it's not a pretty picture in the United States, and it's enormously costly. And I think if you step back and look at it, you would question it just from the get-go. But how do you see that changing with things changing in the future?
I'm going to comment on that, and then I'm going to come back and talk about personalized medicine and a couple of points that Dan made. We just had a referendum that wasn't successful in Massachusetts. What was it? Assisted suicide. And so the conversations get blurry sometimes about end-of-life, assisted suicide, right to choose, who's in the room, who's not in the room. What were some of the advertisements against it? Does anybody remember what the conversation was?
You have to take 500 pills.
You'd have to take 500 pills. What's another one?
No physician present.
No physician present. Is that a problem, not to have a physician present?
No.
That was good. That kind of got me, because I wasn't. Now, I'm not sure I want a physician present. If that's my ending moment, I might want my daughter. I might want somebody else. I might want my nurse. So that was part of the conversation. Pretty persuasive advertisements, weren't they? And we didn't see a lot of advertisements on the other side. But what were the advertisements on the other side? Anybody remember?
Ease of suffering.
Ease of suffering. Pretty important, isn't it? You know, and so these are very personal issues, and we know that they've worked well in some of the states that have had success in coming to these conversations. But assisted suicide is not palliative care. It's not hospice care. Palliative care is when you treat symptoms that people have with the intention of keeping them as productive and keeping their well-being in the best state possible for as long as possible. Hospice, of course, is something different. What's hospice? How many months am I going to live if I go on hospice? 6. And does anybody know if we hit that number? We usually don't. I have an uncle who has a T-shirt that says, "I survived hospice." And my uncle had 3 different episodes of hospice. And he also had 5 daughters who were nurses. There was no way that my Uncle Brady was going to get a pressure ulcer. It wasn't going to happen. Was he going to have swollen feet or miss a medication or not eat? Not a chance. And they just kept looking at him like a miracle, but then his wife, the same thing. So thinking about these very sensitive personal issues, we're not clear as a society. People go, do you know you spend 75% of your healthcare dollars at the end of life? When do you want to spend it? In the middle? No, because that would mean you'd be really sick in the middle of your life. And so what we have is this tremendous revolution and miracles in terms of human longevity. At the turn of the century, your average lifespan was 40 years old. Now it's 80 years old. We used to die of infectious disease. Now we die of chronic disease, where you do have to die of something. We don't know how we're going out, but we know we're going out. So these are the complicated conversations. And I have seen, been with people at the end of life. It is painful and it's difficult. But these are conversations that need to be led by each of you in the room, and you have to have a position. When I was at NYU, I worked in the College of Nursing, and we did a lot of work with the College of Dentistry. And I remember the dean of the dental school said, it's interesting. Nurses are usually employees, and dentists are usually businessmen, entrepreneurs. And I thought about that, and I didn't like it, but I had to say it was also true, that we're usually employed. But here comes this moment with the Affordable Care Act, with accountable care organizations, where you can think about what Christina said about personalized medicine. That's an enormous decision to make. And who's going to do the counseling? Who's going to be the navigator as people decide, what if you know that you're going to have a baby with a birth defect? What if you know that you are going to die of Huntington's disease? Your genes came up and it's not going to be a good thing. How are you going to go through that? That's nursing. That's healthcare, and that's what we do in teams. So we have to really think about that. The last point that I would want to make related to what Dan said is that he talks about technology. And let me remind you that a lot of people live in poverty. Poverty. So David Blumenthal, who's David Blumenthal? Anybody know? This is pop quiz. Familiar, sounds like? David Blumenthal was at CMS, wasn't he? And he was in charge of how we would implement these computers and what meaningful use was. He was at the Mass General, then he went to Washington. He implemented meaningful use, and now he is at the Commonwealth Fund, just doing incredible work in New York. But David was on a panel a couple of weeks ago where one of your peers, by the way, an alum from Bouvet, physical therapy, got up and talked about what it's like to be a newly minted professional. I was so proud of that. But David said, as people talked about all of these conversations, he said, you're forgetting that a lot of people are poor. And by the way, what proportion of people in America have a baccalaureate degree? Guess.
30.
About 30. We just hit 30. We used to be about 26, just hit 30. I read in the Boston Business Journal, and I'm almost done. Boston Business Journal this week. Boston Business Journal this week had an article about completion rates in community colleges in Massachusetts. So the lower performers, what proportion of people finish their degree out of a community college? Guess. 6%. 6%. And that was the lowest one. The next one up was 9% and did not get higher than 15%. So remember, when you're providing care, we have cultural competency that we have to know. People who will not have computers, people who are not going to, it's not in their culture to tell you how they feel about end of life. It isn't what their mom and dad taught them. It's not how they are. So the cultural competency piece and the ability to really think about those two things. So remember that not everybody's going to have all the wonderful things that you and I might have.
Yeah, I think I was told one time that average stay in hospice is like 7 days. So think about that. I mean, it's and actually that's one part of the system, in my experience, actually does work. I mean, they worry about your comfort, nothing else. They're not trying to boot you out of the hospital, get you going. It's a whole different way of life, and it's one part of the system I thought seemed to work correct. But and that is covered by Medicare if you have the diagnosis of 6 months or less.
Can I tell you one thing about that, Chris? So there was an article that talked about hospices that went out of business, and the reason they did was because they didn't have that window exactly right, and so they weren't reimbursed. And so people who had been hospice care providers, and this is in Schenectady County, were not paid. So we have to be watching the outliers as well. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, when we were looking at hospice homes, there was a story that came up. There was a woman that had been in another different one that we went to, a hospice where she'd been there for like 22 months. And they said, that's not really hospice care, so they kind of interesting. Any more comments about personalized medicine? I just think this whole thing, the ethical thing fascinates me.
I do have a comment, and actually when Chris asked the question, what I struggle with, how do I keep this at 2 minutes? Because we have entire conferences for days and days about personalized medicine, and it's such a hot topic. And it's not just a hot topic for the altruistic reasons that we have the science, and therefore we should be able to deliver better care, but because by having a higher ability to predict a positive response in the patients, you can actually get drugs approved and reimbursed at a much higher rate. And in some diseases where the drug becomes the difference between life and death, or between being functional and not being functional, obviously the ability to reimburse is very high. What's happening in drug development and with the approval process for new drugs is that marginal increments in benefit are no longer acceptable, which is why everybody's shifting from the era of sort of chemical small molecules to biologics, because people are looking at the personalized medicine approaches where you can have a very high and predictable clinical impact, because they will allow you to get the drug not just approved and reimbursed. And now when I'm spending the last year or so doing consulting for venture capital and drug companies, and when you review development programs, I tell them it's not just about getting approved, it's really about getting reimbursed. If you don't have a clear picture on your ability to get reimbursed in the commercial landscape, it becomes very, very difficult.
Yeah, in fact, we were talking about this, and you explained to me that the Me Too drugs are not really there anymore, and they are looking for something that has more.
We're tapped out of that.
Right, exactly.
We're definitely tapped out of that.
The whole pharma market has changed and will change even more.
So the word high differentiation is the key word now.
Right.
How differentiated are you? Are you making are you providing a really, really meaningful increment?
Excellent.
That's perceivable by the patient, not just a number.
Sure.
A laboratory number.
If you don't mind, let me give a very quick entrepreneurial answer to something the Dean mentioned. This is my boss. I have to be careful about disagreeing.
You never have been yet.
People do want health instead of health care, but at the same time, when you look at a study, when they say we called everybody every day to take some sort of measurement, and then they say, well, what happened when we stopped calling them? They tell us we missed that call. People do, I don't want to say enjoy the process, but there is something about being connected to the care, whether it's connected to, a synthetic person on a computer, whether it's being connected to a real person, being connected more to their physician, to their clinicians, to the nurses, or either calling them on the phone, on the iPhones, on the whatevers, that people are getting more involved and really appreciate the things that happen there. I came in through Retina Check, where we discovered, and when I looked at the literature, that they said that when people were shown a picture of their retinas by their physician, it was intended for the physician to see if we needed to send them to an ophthalmologist for care, but just showing that to the patients to say, this is why taking care of your blood sugar is important, because you see these spots, this is where your blood vessels are leaking because your blood sugar is a little too high. And this actually lowered their average A1C level. They took better care of themselves just by being shown by their clinician that it was important to do so by looking at this picture together. So I wouldn't just focus on the care. Think about how people are responding to this, and people do want, there are all the people who are doing the weight loss tracking and all these things. People who have chronic diseases want to be able to track it themselves too. Their clinicians want them to be able to bring in information to say, how are you doing, so we can get more information than we can get from you in a 12-minute visit. There's a lot more to it than just the care they're getting in the office.
I would put that in the category of prevention and education. I would also say that Dan knows that we have 4 key themes in Bouvet, and they are drug discovery, urban population health, self-care, self-management, and healthy aging, which begins at birth. So there you are in the self-care, self-management. With the aging of caregivers, we're going to have this tsunami of boomers who are going to get out of the workforce. My kids can't wait. And so, with that, out goes a whole bunch of the caregivers who won't be there to do that. So you're going to need self-care, self-management. Number one. Number two, they're going to need care. So this notion of self-care, self-management, and how we get in front of it through some of the strategies Dan's talking about is going to be crucial.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
Because I feel very strongly about, in a positive way, about something that Dan said, which is when you said it's not all about care, but talking to a patient and having that interaction and education is care. But unfortunately, what's been happening in our society largely, there is a need for instant gratification. So we've come to equate care with something is being done to me, whether that's pharmacological or a procedure. And actually, we're coming to the point where the cost of paying for all that is no longer, it has become exorbitant, and we're no longer able to support those costs because we're putting very little in prevention, and we're also not making the patient accountable or informed enough to be accountable. So actually, one huge area of opportunity from an entrepreneurial standpoint, just so we stay on topic, even though we're getting passionate, is things that have to do with the patients being able to self-monitor themselves, especially with all this remote care and transfer information that's happening. So they can be educated and being able to provide a lot of that monitoring and early signal back to their healthcare provider in a way that doesn't require returning to the hospital, additional expensive visits, and so forth.
Why don't we turn to the audience? Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
So on what you just said about the need for care, the trend with most healthcare organizations is do more with less. So shorter appointments, more patients per day, fewer staff. How do you balance that to make it work?
More phones. I kid, but no, that's actually part of the answer, is people are bringing in electronic systems. They have call systems that they're selling to physicians' offices that will call people to gather information and to remind them and to do different things that previously staff had done.
And I think you're talking about turning and positioning someone in your bed. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm talking about, you used to have a half an hour to perform exams, now it's 20 minutes because you're getting reimbursed less. And if you can't get more money, you have to do more exams to stay where you work.
So that's where the accountable care organizations begin to demonstrate for us why fee-for-service is not the right model and how we can work smarter in the context of that envelope. It's an experiment that's going on, and it's going to be really important for us to monitor it very closely. A phone is never going to take the place of somebody, being able to be, suppose the physical therapist, for example, is an example of someone who comes to see you after you fracture your hip. So we'll have some important technologies, but we're going to have to also figure out how to use this ACO moment in the best way possible.
Yeah, I would follow up with that by saying it's a numbers game now. I mean, how many patients can you put through the practice? In my industry, the dialysis industry, the government has shifted to a quality incentive program, they call it. It actually, incentive is not the right word. They take money away from you if you don't achieve certain markers, and one of them is hospitalization. They want to keep you out of the hospital. Someone has to do some chemical assays that you might get, but they're really focused on keeping you well and less time in the hospital, and the doctors are going to be reimbursed that way going forward. Primary care doctors are going to become the way of life. The fee-for-service guys are going to have trouble because it's just not the way the system's going to run. So, any other questions? Over there.
There's a question for the Dean.
You had mentioned something about nurses always being employees and dentists being entrepreneurs.
That's what the dentist said, yes.
Which is true.
It is true.
So I wanted to ask,
Sure.
what I'm thinking of, and being an entrepreneur as a nurse.
Yes.
I'm thinking, you're saying that we do triage, navigate, chronic illness, and went down the list. But I'm not computer savvy. I don't know how to get out of this box of taking care of a patient. So I want to ask you, if I should go into business as a navigator, any ideas?
I think that the area for nurses are going to be exactly in the right place to start small businesses. If they're, and you'll have the support of Chris and Joe if you want to have that conversation with them. But it takes a lot of courage to get out of that location that we've been so comfortable in. It used to be that 70% of nurses were employed in hospitals. Now it's closer to 50% and it's going down. And so if you can make that breakthrough to say, I want to start my own company, I want my own home care company, I want my own medication management company, it takes a background that, if we were to ask the faculty or ask the students, is that in your curriculum? I know what they're going to tell me. And so what should we be doing for the curriculum right now to get you ready? And how can we work with the faculty to accelerate that process and to have some of you raise your hand and say, I'm thinking about this, and get the help you need. Because I think that it's going to be exciting and we're going to see a lot more nurse-like companies. And then I saw you had a hand up earlier, this lady at the end of the row. Did you still want to have a comment? So I'll repeat it in just a minute. So you're talking about the depersonalization of healthcare and how you're going and you're looking at a person who's talking to a screen, not you. I think people are saying that more and more, and each of us as clinical care providers have to guard against that. People don't want you looking down doing this. They want you to look at you. And that goes back to Dan and Christina's points.
And unfortunately, it's happening in society in general. We're interacting. It's almost a way to avoid people. If you don't want to deal with anyone, you're looking at your smartphone. You're not looking at people. So I think that depersonalization is happening across the board, not just in healthcare. It's sort of the benefit that cuts both ways.
I want to know how the informatics, just say system, I don't know exactly what you said this, but how would it affect patients' confidentiality?
It's a good question. She's asking about patient confidentiality with the new electronic systems. And the answer is that when we had paper systems, anybody could look at them and nobody would know who looked at them. Now that we can log who looks at things, we can actually find out who looked at them. So you might notice problems more, but you can notice them more so you can follow up on them. And you can also say, hey, why are you looking at this? And they will flag patients. If you are a famous person going into hospital, people have to go through an extra procedure to get into your record. They have to say why they're trying to get in there. But if you're just like me, an average ordinary person who goes into the hospital, your records still have an audit trail that if you go to Partners, if you go to Beth Israel, you yourself can look to see who's looked at your record. Does that stop everybody from looking at it? No. But it completely changes it from a piece of paper that anybody could have looked at while it was sitting on the shelf and nobody would have known who looked at it. Can you lose a big bunch of data at once when somebody loses an unsecured laptop? Yes. Which is why a big part of healthcare, what's going on with HIPAA, what's going on in health informatics, is securing this data, is encrypting it. The CIO from MGH teaches in the program and talked about when they lost a big amount of data and got fined a big fine for it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't because of the fine. I mean, they all felt that this was something that shouldn't have happened. And how can they adjust their systems and adapt so that your data is not just floating around, so that it's encrypted, so that if somebody's going to look at it, it gets logged. If somebody's going to be looking at it, they have to get permission in certain cases, so that certain information is not going to be available to them. So if you show up, it will say, you are taking this drug, you're diabetic, and this is probably why you're unconscious. It will help give them some hints. But the fact that you have an STD, a psychiatric disorder, or certain things won't show up, except for certain people or unless you open it up.
Okay. I know that mostly when we talk about entrepreneurs, we're looking at for-profit applications. Now, is there a role for non-profits within this universe of opportunities?
Great question.
Well, So, as we like to say at the HSC, entrepreneurism is a state of mind. It's not an actual situation where, and Joe and I had this conversation many times, it's not necessarily something that means you put your money into starting a business. You can be an entrepreneur in any environment. It's really a way of thinking, a way of leading, a way of being creative and thinking outside of the box. Specifically to answer your question, I think there are a lot of entrepreneurial, at least for the aspect of the field that I'm familiar with, which is what's happening in drug development, in the pharmaceutical industry, in a lot of patient advocacy, actually. There is a lot of sophistication now being built and very entrepreneurial approaches in venture philanthropy, in patient advocacy groups that are supporting research and raising money and trying to essentially fill that gap between what academia does and what industry can do. So there are actually many very entrepreneurial endeavors taking on in a nonprofit setting. So I actually am very glad you asked the question, because I always feel that when we talk about entrepreneurs, it gets understood as having to start a business. And I think that most people haven't and won't start a business, and yet I think we can think of ourselves as being entrepreneurial through having shifted the paradigm in some other way.
You know, that was a great question. There's a political side of that, too. I know from my own experience that these advocacy groups that are dedicated to their cause are very powerful up on the Hill in Washington, and they can make, and particularly for pharma companies that are aligned with these folks, it's very powerful to be able to direct where resources are going, whether it's research or reimbursement. So it's a great question. Another question, okay.
My question is for Dan. How is the landscape for strategic consulting in healthcare, maybe Fortune 500 or other large companies? Is it matured and dried up, or is there still room for entrepreneurs in the strategic aspect?
I would say to some extent it's fairly mature. So a new entrant, a small entrant, would have a little bit of trouble, but it's also a space where people want some sort of credential. They want to see the people who said, oh, I have 15, 20 years of experience, and not, hey, we've started a new business, and we've started a new business with the three people who have 20 years of experience. It tends to be in that strategic consulting area.
So where is there opportunity entrepreneurially for analytics and strategy?
I would say more, not just on the strategy consulting, but much more on the analytics side, of getting them the data, of extracting the data from their systems, of cleaning the data, of being able to present the data in a meaningful way to them. That's what they need, and that's what there's room for.
It's a wide open landscape.
I'd say yes.
Yeah. If you put Hadoop on your business plan, yes.
And Christina, what would you say in the drug development area and analytics, things of that nature? Is there a role there?
You mean, I think you're talking about strategically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said about experience, about having the scars from having done that, and having had successes and also a few failures, which we all learn from. I think that sort of the building blocks is, the data gathering, interpretation, ability to present it. I can't stress how important it is in a meaningful way. Really ability to converse in the language of that audience, which is very, very important. And actually that over time starts enabling you to gather the experience that down the line will allow you to kind of do it and maybe move to the more strategic level.
Go to you next. So the four of you have all spoken in some capacity about, sick people and how we take care of them and what we can do in different capacities, either through government or through pharmaceuticals or through making products or through education. And so the question I have is about how specific a drug can be or a product can be, because at some point making something is not profitable if it doesn't sell to a wide number. So, a dialysis machine to help people with kidney failure is obviously relatively widespread. 50 years ago, cancer was called the cancer, and now it's thousands of different kinds of cancer. And so we have more specific ways of identifying diseases and things like that. But then what happens to a very rare disease that needs a very specific solution? How do we create solutions, or at least treatments, for these very specific things while still, at the end of the day, making it profitable? Because at the end of the day, that's what runs the engine. People want to make a buck, and that's not always the right thing to do, but when you add all the people that have all these specific kinds of problems, that's thousands of people. And how do we take care of those people?
I think if Christina wants to start there.
So I think making a buck is not a bad thing. It's a requirement if you're going to continue to exist as a company and if you're going to be a viable business. There's got to be a way to return to your investors and to be able to then sustain the ongoing pipeline development and discovery work and so forth. So that is just a fact. It needs to do that to be sustainable. You're raising an excellent questions about how thin can you subset these diseases and these patient populations before it becomes not a sustainable business model. And this is something that the industry struggles with. However, I think companies like Genzyme have shown that if you have, and I come back to this, a highly meaningful clinical effect that really makes a difference, enables a patient to live with a high quality of life, you actually can make the business model work. And but that's very important. What you can have, something that's very marginal, where that separates sort of the nice-to-have drugs, the difference between they're going to come up with an antihistamine that's now once a day instead of 4 times a day. Those days are over. But I think in areas where you're looking for a very high clinical impact, that has, again, major differentiation, huge effect, you're going to be able to do that. And I know that for a fact. I believe in that because I just started, actually this is my first week, I am actually running a newly funded company, which is an accelerator for rare and orphan diseases. And the way it's funded by the largest life science fund in the world, so clearly there's belief in the venture capital community that this is viable. And the way we look at this is, again, through traditional orphan diseases, but also the subsets of large diseases that may not be responsive to the currently available drugs and so forth. But part of what we do every time is an assessment, not just of the science, but of the cost of developing the program, whether there is a viable model to be able to deliver that drug to the patient and for us to be able to refuel the process so we can look at other drugs. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, except what happens when it's not viable?
Then the drug doesn't go into development.
Yeah.
Or you find out what the killer questions are, what are the toughest questions. You do those experiments first, and unless these drugs in this situation have to jump a much higher bar, they have to be highly effective on a highly consistent basis. So you have to have high level of reliability up front. They're going to work. So you can have a lot of error in there. But that's just part of the initial evaluation of what we call the diligence, which is the science and also the business model.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a story recently about, you probably know this, the malaria drug that they just pulled from the clinical trials because it was ineffective. Now, malaria is a huge worldwide problem, not so much here in the United States, and it strikes, forgive me, I don't know the numbers, but the percentage of pregnant young women in Africa or the African continent, it's huge. It's a very high number. But this drug's been worked on for years, and I don't know what the reimbursement is for that, but it's a compelling problem. And it's been funding. I think a lot of it comes from like the Gates Foundation and stuff like that. But it was a major pharma company that had the trial going. So there was some commercial promise there. They wouldn't have been doing it. But it may be just the numbers, hundreds of millions of people.
I actually have a multi-question. So, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. In my practice, we have issues in terms of playing the insurance game with the FDA regulations of the 20% bioavailability between generic versus name-brand drugs. It's hard to get coverage for patients to get the appropriate drug that we know that's going to work for them, especially with those with the narrow therapeutic range. And then we're often losing money because we have the information systems, there's so much electronic documentation, but it's a lot of it. So providers are often not billing at the level that they can because there's so much documentation behind it where they just want to provide. How are we going to capture these things? And there's no reimbursement right now for telemedicine, which is what a lot of practices are going to. I work for partners, and so now we have these patient gateway systems. So how do you capture all that and get their reimbursement? So you got to hire the staff to do this, but there's no funds to do all these wonderful things.
So there are a couple levels to that. One is there are charge capture products that will go through and mine your data to find what you're not billing. And there are people making a business out of that. So if you want to go do for that, that's a good direction. In partners in particular, but I'll speak as an example generally, there are people who are bringing in access such as that. They're bringing in patient gateways where you can log in and send a message to your clinician and then get back an answer, never having gone into an office visit. Therefore, you can't charge for an office visit. This is what's changing in the reimbursement, is because we were paying for how well you do, not for what we do to you, how many office visits we expose you to, then we are going to be able to support those. Because we're getting paid to keep you keep your A1C low for a diabetic. We're paid to keep someone in chronic heart failure out of the hospital. You get your flu shot. Whatever we're going to do, we're paid for your outcomes. And so, however we get there is going to work. And it's still the system is still hybrid. So there is still an incentive to bring people into the office to some extent. We're getting there. But that's what we're working towards, to say it doesn't matter how you got them healthy, as long as you got them all healthy, or you got them as healthy as you could. That's what you'll get paid for. But there's a real issue there of yes, we don't reimburse for certain things. There is a change in telemedicine, though. Of course, with Retina Check, and I watched this very carefully. There were certain there are certain things you do that they started saying because of the pod lab rules, and I get into all sorts of complicated stuff that don't, if you want to speak offline. But what they have done is you can now get paid for a patient who is in another Medicare coverage area, if you are in a separate area for them, and and then you have to look also at, and that's been covered, but you're not having with the licensing issues, is what happens if you are in a different state from your provider. Those things are being worked out. We're not fully there yet, but that really is coming together pretty quickly.
You sound like a victim of the current reimbursement system, and my experience in the healthcare world was if somebody doesn't pay for it, it's not going to happen, unfortunately. Going back to somewhat of the question over here. But you're going to see models change where we're getting paid to keep you well rather than just treat every episode that you have. So we'll be rewarded for keeping you out of the hospital, or, so telemedicine makes sense. It's more responsive. It's quicker. It's more convenient. That will get funded through these accountable care organizations or some kind of similar scene like that. A couple more questions.
As far as personalized medicine, such as genetic targeting for pharmaceuticals and whatnot, from readings that I've done, it seems that there's a large cost barrier, and I don't see it in clinical practice at all yet, because it seems to be so expensive to implement at this time. Do you see this new Affordable Care Act making a difference in that, or is this something that's going to be time-based, and do you foresee a time in the near future when this might be a widespread kind of thing that can focus on preventative health care and better use of drugs?
We know that We know that costs come down as we get more efficient, and we are able to show a difference. And so, IVF is an example of something that was prohibitive and still pretty expensive. But I mean, it has changed fundamentally over the time period when people have become better at it. They've made a better case for it. So these costs are expected to come down. The issue whether or not it'll be widespread is something that we'll have to wait and see. But it is expensive, and we have to figure out what'll be. People talk about rationing, and there has always been two-tier systems where people who do not have money can access certain things, and people who have money access other things. And so we all have to keep thinking about how that plays out in our society.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think that actually science will drive the pace there, because we have a few precedents, one being Herceptin, which was the first drug with a companion diagnostic where you went into a very specific patient subgroup, where if you gave that drug to everybody with breast cancer, the response would have been drowned in the whole population. And I think that the science is driving new things, and I think that there's going to be an expectation, and I think there is an expectation that healthcare and clinical care will move in that direction, but it will take time. But I think part of it will be science-gated. The other thing that's happening because of and personalized care medicine doesn't always have to be expensive, except that we are talking with many of these diseases about very expensive drugs to make and to develop and to study. One of the things that's being talked about a lot is the whole model of drug development in terms of how much money we're spending with the traditional phase 1 to 3. We spend 1 or 2 years in healthy volunteer studies before we even go into the population of interest. All that is being turned upside down, and people are looking at how to design studies that can be more informative with some of the genomic tools, with some of these novel biomarkers, and how to get how to have the ability to generate data that can help you make a go, no-go decision earlier before you spend, tons or hundreds of millions of dollars to be into a phase 3 program to realize that now you have a binary answer. So we're trying to move that decision, that go, no-go decision, to a much earlier time in development, and science is helping us get there, and also informatics is helping us get there. But it's going to be gradual. It's not going to be a quantum leap. But eventually, I think that's really the future.
The Dean mentioned rationing of care. There's a group, if you haven't heard of them, you should know about them, but they're called the IPAB, not iPad, it's with a B, IPAB. And it's the Independent Payment Advisory Board, which is part of the Affordable Health Care Act. And it's a group of 11 maybe, I don't know, 11 appointed by the president, and they're going to decide what's going to get covered and what isn't. So I don't know where personalized medicine is going to fall on their radar screen, but it's that kind of decision making is going to have to happen.
And if I could just add something, because you're asking such an excellent question. I come back to how meaningful is the response, is the clinical response. A lot of what's happening right now in, let's say, the UK, where the NHS really drives how things are reimbursed, care is delivered in a very different way, where people wait for a very long time to get surgeries. Same thing is happening in Canada. People come to the US if they can pay, or if they have private insurance, they can get you can get the procedure immediately. There's a different way of delivering care, and there's this group which is abbreviated NICE, N-I-E-C in the UK, that reviews every single new approved drug. So a lot of the very expensive oncology drugs, like the Avastin for a number of new cancers, where they get approved and used in the US based on an increment in survival of, let's call it 6 or 8 weeks. They actually are not reimbursed in some of these countries unless you have private insurance. So it gets very, very complicated because when they do the pharmacoeconomic studies, it basically doesn't support a model where they can pay for 6 or 12 months of therapy for this kind of an increment or improvement in outcome. But to the extent that you have a much more dramatic effect, which is sustained, then the ability to approve, reimburse grows exponentially. It's unfortunate in oncology because the whole history of oncology is through progress made through small increments. And now when we look in retrospect, 10, 20, 30 years later, the increments become very meaningful in terms of years, but in very few cases have we taken that quantum leap with one drug.
But if we could start by making sure that young people don't smoke, that we are doing our public health piece as practitioners, as clinicians, as nurses, as all the people in the room, and make sure that we educate people about prevention, things that are so clear to us. That would be a very important start so that we don't get to the point where we are giving people designer drugs for their cancer and heart disease. So that's keep going. Community health centers have a huge role to play. All of you do.
Other societies have dealt with this problem on what we're willing to pay for incremental improvement or not. I think it's in the UK, they call them QALYs, I think. But it's a quality of life kind of equation. What do you call it?
It's not always so nice.
I wouldn't call it an equation, but they actually weigh quality of life versus cost to society. And we haven't gotten there yet. The U.S. system's been very fickle, and we want the latest, and we want it now. So that's what scares a lot of people about having another $32 2 million people insured, that, next thing you're going to see is they go to the doctor, and then they're going to say, hey, the doctor bills are up. So that's going to happen. It happened in Massachusetts. They finally got them to put policies out there to cover the population not covered. They got it at the price they wanted. And then a year later, they said, geez, everybody's going to the doctor. Well, what did you expect, But over time, the preventative stuff, targeting some diseases that are, dramatic and need more attention, giving better information, I think you'll see the system. There's a lot of fat in the system the way we do it right now. So hopefully we can broaden the coverage around that efficiency.
Okay. Sorry, real quick. So in terms of financing, there's many opportunity areas. We can learn about how to build business, etc. But do you have any good advice for how to finance opportunities?
Can you talk about venture capital?
The venture capitalists will take that one.
Well, I think that before we even get to that point, I'm assuming you're referring to opportunities where you're the self-starter, maybe you with some colleagues have an idea, that sort of thing. Well, I think that the first thing, because the bar is higher than it's been even 5 years ago, because of what's been happening in the economy, there are fewer investment dollars to go around, whether on the private or public side, everywhere. So I think the first thing to do is to really do your homework and make sure you understand your idea well, and you actually look and put together a business model. It's not just about the idea. It's about, can you deliver that idea in a package, in a business model that's viable, and that a lot of people would be interested in. And can you make that argument for that, what they will add in terms of value? So I think that there is no replacement for homework. Just telling somebody you have a great idea, and I think there are many people in the audience, I'm looking at Brett, that would tell you a lot about this. Just having a great idea is just not enough. It's certainly not enough in science. And actually, when we fund companies, we look at the team very closely. If the science is great and the team is not convincing, we cannot fund it, because science and great ideas don't run themselves. So in terms of funding, I think that there are some, are you a graduate student here or? Nursing. Nursing, great. Lots of things available on campus in terms of the courses that have been mentioned. Also, we have the HSE, which I'm compelled to say we've worked as a group with many people. Like you, we meet with people on a screening basis. Julie can tell you all about it, and we even assess whether we're the right group and if we have the right resources and skill sets to help you out and maybe guide you elsewhere. But it's a group, so at least it's something that would get you started. And also, we will be very candid and tell you if we think this actually can translate into something that's a business. And the other thing you have to decide is sometimes we see ideas that are a hobby. Is this something that you really want to turn into a business, or is it something that you're just interested in that's fun that you're going to do on the side? Because that really drives a whole other set of decisions about how you're going to, what kind of resources you'll put behind it. But certainly at this stage, you're far from raising venture capital money or anything like that. But lots of opportunities with mass biotech, innovation, SBIRs, the NIH has mechanisms. So there's a whole series of support systems that provide both small financing to help you get through some early milestones and increase the value of your technology or your idea, as well as potentially services that they can provide for you to help defer some of the offset some of the expenses.
I'll make one comment, and maybe the dean could talk about grant funding, but right here within the university, Joel Russell is here from CRI, and they have programs where they invest in technologies and try to help them move forward. So that's a good resource. The College of Engineering, they also have some grants that they allocate to help businesses start and get off the ground. So the university's done a pretty good job and doing a better job of trying to spur some of these developments. So I would encourage you to look internally also.
Thanks for being here, all of you. Dean Fulmer, I have a real interest in helping nurses take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. I have seen and been part of myself in the years I've been a nurse of the stress that people are under. So I have a real interest in holistic health, and I was wondering if you see a future for that?
So when I was at NYU, we started the first holistic nursing master's program in the United States. And so I believe in it and supported it, and I think it's a movement. And I think that we're just beginning to see the opportunities emerge for the way in which the Center for Alternative Medicine at Columbia, you're seeing in Washington at the National Institutes of Health, there's also the Center for Alternative Medicine, which isn't the same but bumps into holistic healthcare. I was in Hong Kong last year, and have any of you been to Hong Kong? Okay, so some of you might be from Hong Kong, but I will tell you that you walk in, there's TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and a whole country that is very familiar with the way in which those strategies can work. But I think you're also talking about yoga, weight reduction, not smoking, trying to no pink collar lateral violence in the workplace, no yelling at each other, and that's where behavioral health comes in, and it's a very big issue right now. We had a decline in the number of nurses who chose psychiatric mental health for whatever reason, and now we're short. And so all of a sudden we need this surge of psych mental health, counseling, social work, because there's a lot of behavioral health to be done. Look at the Veterans Administration and all of those vets returning with all of the incredible, not only PTSD, but think about those individuals coming back with horrible injury. So there's a lot to do. It's a wide open field, and lead. Yeah, stick with it. It's great.
Thank you.
I would give the technology answer to that, say some of the opportunity. I mean, I'm going to make it up right now. I have an application that shows 5 puppies playing. And I just watch that for 60 seconds, and you know what?
And your pulse is lowered in.
And, that's alternative medicine to me. And technology. We could connect you with your friends. We can, just all sorts of things to be invented that everybody in this room can be thinking about, that you don't need, $50 million to go invent a new drug? $300 million for a phase 2 trial. I mean, these huge amounts of money that you need for pharmaceuticals, they have their place. I certainly don't want to knock them at all. But people in the room who are saying, you know what, I'm not going to go get $300 million in funding, maybe you can make an app. Maybe you can come up with some way to help somebody with their stress, some way that I can connect to my friends, some way that will remind me of who my friends are, something there that will help people, that will cost you and a buddy, a weekend of pizza to develop. Assuming your buddy's a computer programmer.
So we talk a lot about entrepreneurism, but in universities we talk a lot about leadership, don't we? And we say you're all leaders, aren't you? And so it is tough to get in that space, but if you can lead, and if you can reach out to your support groups when there's so much pushback that it feels like it's insurmountable, that's when you know you're turning the corner for leadership. Yeah.
We're going to have to go to wrap-up questions, but if you have anything you'd like to approach the panelists with afterwards, they'll be outside at the end of the presentation. I want to do a wrap-up question for each one of the panelists. It's the same question, and what advice would you give to our audience tonight, those who want to become entrepreneurs and take advantage of the evolving healthcare system? So, Christina?
Well, none of us have a crystal ball, so I would say make change your best friend and expect change, and expect that our career trajectories will be very different than what they've been historically. And I'm certainly doing something I was never trained in pharmacy school to do, even though I did 5 years of pharmacy at Dana-Farber. Then I went into a whole trajectory which was I wouldn't have been able to predict, and I wasn't trained for, which is why I went back to get my master's at Northeastern in health research methodology, because I was doing a lot of research. So I think be prepared for change, and also be very aware of opportunities that may come your way when you least expect them. I think ability to communicate, I think that one of the things that will be more important than ever is to the crosstalk between different industries, between different functional area. It's absolutely crucial. And certainly science is so complex and costs are so high that no one individual entity can handle it. So whatever role you're going to be on, it's going to be a role that's going to require collaboration and really meaningful communication. So I think that the ability to network and communicate and really understand the language of other audiences, which in the past wasn't necessary because we could all work in our silos for many, many years and just have the handoff. It's no longer happening that way. So I say that's something to be prepared for. So I think versatility and look, and I think you have to get used to a certain amount of risk, and some of us can certainly go to sleep knowing we're taking calculated risk, but I think that there's going to be very, very little that's predictable or guaranteed. So I think you need to be prepared to take a certain amount of risk and not expect necessarily stability in the historical sense.
Dan?
I would say generally is don't think of job and entrepreneurship as two separate things.
That's right.
I'm either going to go get a job as a nurse, as a pharmacist, as a, forgive me if I don't list everybody, but I'm going to go become an entrepreneur. Think of, I'm going to go be a nurse, and while I'm working there, I'm going to be dealing with people who have pressure ulcers, and I'm going to notice something, then I'm going to notice that there's something to be done about it, and then I'm going to talk to somebody who's a mechanical engineer, and then suddenly the two of us have started up a company. Mm-hmm. That's the way these things are going to happen. If you've got an idea, I don't want to discourage that. But don't try and walk out of here saying, well, I must figure out my idea so that I can go off and be an entrepreneur. Go be a person who looks around you and does whatever you're going to do, keeping in mind that you're going to watch for the things that you say, you know what, this needs to change, this could be done differently, this could be done better. These are nice options, but if we just went outside the box, we could do this, and I'm going to go figure out how I'm going to build that. Adapt and overcome.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I would say that those two summaries were fabulous, and what I would add is love what you do. Be with people you respect. If you don't, change what you're doing. Please stay well read. Be at the top of your game at all times, and feel free to lead. Don't wait. I see a lot of opportunity for all of us, and we have a large number of nurses in the room tonight. I see a lot of opportunity for nursing. I see a lot of opportunity for all of us as we think about what we want to do to change the system. And our colleagues in all the other health disciplines, our colleagues in medicine are waiting for us to step into the spaces and make a difference. And so we want to do that, and we should do that, and we do it with a lot of joy. And hold your university responsible for backstopping you. Even when you're not in school and you're gone, call us back. Got these great programs going on. And, it's a community that is responsible to be here for you. And so please know that.
And I would add to that, going down the line here, I get a passion and go for it. Information is power. And something Christina mentioned earlier, the days of working for the same company for 25 years like I did, before I recognized that I wanted to do something on my own with my partners. I worked 25 years in the same industry. But then we recognized an opportunity, and we said to ourselves, we can do that better. And we went ahead and did it. And then, when I did it, I was, how old was I? I was 49 when I started the company that I'm in now. And our company now is a very sizable concern, excellent company, and we do a better job. But it's never over. So yes, I'm being reminded. First of all, I want to give the panel a round of applause.